Hello and welcome to Bombshells. I'm Fleur Elizabeth.
And I'm Amy.
And today we have managed to catch Ben Sixsmith during his how many hours in the UK?
About 24.
24 hours. We've managed to see him twice in that period of time, which is very lucky. So Ben is digital editor and podcast critic of the Critic magazine. Also writes his own substack called The Zone and has also written a book called Naughties. So, Ben, for those of our subscribers that don't know you, tell us about what you do and what your journey was to get there.
So right now I'm working for the Critic magazine, a very fine magazine of politics and culture. Mm-hmm. And the journey to get there was very incidental. I was just a very arrogant and obnoxious young man inflicting my opinions on the world. And then very gradually I began to write for little websites and then little magazines and just slowly building up a profile while doing a full-time job in teaching. And then I somehow fell backwards into an editing job, and life is full of mysterious chances of fate.
Yeah. And you live in
Poland.
In Poland. How's that? You said that it's, 35 degrees there?
It's very, very hot. It's Mediterranean.
Yeah, which I didn't actually think that about Poland. I thought it'd be way colder than here.
Well, we have quite extreme winters and then quite extreme summers. So if you came in December, you'd be freezing to death. But if you come in August, then you can get baked.
I actually did go in December. I packed loads of jumpers because I thought it would be absolutely freezing. But the Poles love heating.
Oh, yeah. So
I was just sweating the whole time when I was indoors. Because
a Polish apartment is just like a sauna.
Yeah, it was horrible.
Very interesting.
Anyway.
So you don't know.
Yeah. How has Poland influenced your perspective on British and European politics and culture?
I think when I got there, as someone who's kind of right-leaning, I was a big admirer of the more traditional, not in the kind of hyper-traditional sundresses and wheat fields way, but in the traditions they would have connected with religion, connected with honouring the dead, in the fairly strong family structures. And that's changed over time. Poland has become a much more socially liberal country while I've been there, so I don't want to kind of romanticize it in that kind of base trad way. But certainly when I got there, it affirmed those values I had in myself.
So those values you would define as right-leaning.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the sort of what you would call right-leaning values, or?
Well, I mean, there's a broad tapestry of values that could be interpreted.
What would they be?
But I would say right-leaning values, you have a stronger inclination towards order, towards hierarchy, towards the kind of stability of institutions, towards protecting what we have rather than just seeking what's new. But of course, we also need to make progress to secure that which is traditional. There's a Chesterton quote where he says that if you just leave a white post in time, it'll grow black. So you need to keep repainting it white. So it's all about balancing the foundations of order with the construction of progress, I think is a kind of right-leaning model. But there's, of course, broad space of interpretation within that where people can disagree or agree.
Interesting definition. Living in Poland, do you think that's influenced your sort of coverage of culture and politics in your writing, or if not, what has influenced that?
So I think one thing I like about living abroad but writing about a lot of British attitudes and events is I have a good kind of distance from them. I think if I was living in London, I could very easily get sucked into a kind of slightly incestuous milieu of self-important right-wing men sitting around sipping overly expensive craft beer and talking about their various trivial conspiracies. So I think it's good to have some kind of separation from the social world of politics and journalism, and it gives me, I hope, a little bit more of an objective and maybe not so self-regarding attitude towards British events. I think also sometimes when you're not living in a place, potentially you could have a very limited perspective because you don't have that daily experience, but also potentially because you can have a more broad experience. You can have a broader understanding of the facts without being biased by what you see on a day-to-day level. So it's a difficult balance to keep, but I hope it's one that I've managed to maintain.
So from an outsider's perspective then, or a slightly outsider's perspective, what do you predict for the first changes of the Labour government? What will they be?
So I think there's going to be a lot of meddling with the Constitution in various different ways. I mean, we kind of saw that yesterday with the King's speech. I think there's going to be a lot of devolving power, not just out to different geographical territories, not just out to Wales and Scotland, but to the various different organisations and institutions where they could be presented as these kind of neutral, objective bodies of evidence and data, but which can actually be very biased and partial and powerful. I think they will be, though. I think they will want to try and rapidly improve living standards, because obviously their win was very big, but also very soft, and they're going to want to get as much support as quickly as possible. So I think we probably will see a big kind of theatrical push towards house building or cutting NHS waiting times, or even trying to cut small boat arrivals, because they must know that they need to get as much support as quickly as possible, because otherwise they're going to go very quickly down the toilet.
Yeah. One thing that I think a lot of journalists and people that work in media are concerned about is that there may be sort of more media regulations and the Starmer Ofcom rules. You know, I was saying GB News has never existed under anything but a Conservative government. On a sort of less serious level, there may be more backlash against sort of right-wing media outlets. Now, I've written for the Critic a few times and I've never received backlash, but I'm not sort of a big name writer. But how do you deal with getting that kind of backlash against articles that are written? Because there's one thing about the Critic is that you publish a real broad range of views. So, yeah. And also do sort of maybe more traditionally conservative readers ever get annoyed at you for publishing things that don't fit the box that they may have put you in?
Yeah, I mean, I think backlash can be damaging on different levels. One is when it threatens your employment security, which is the most threatening, of course. Like if somebody's not just sending you abuse, but sending abuse to your boss, that's potentially very scary, because you could be out of a job and homeless and destitute. Once your employment is secure, I think backlash can become a much less serious thing. If somebody's just calling you names on social media, I think it's best interpreted as entertainment.
Yeah.
It's just they're kind of impotent, lashing out at the world as embodied by you, and you've become this kind of Emmanuel Goldstein figure, and you just have to laugh and roll with it. But then you also have to separate the abuse and the hatred from the actual constructive criticism, because I think when you are a writer or a podcaster or a commentator, it's quite easy to see all criticism as it's just the haters. So you have to be calm and dispassionate enough to say, is this guy just pissed off at the world and directing his fury towards me, or does he actually have a point about something we've published or something I've written? So, yeah.
We get a lot of unsolicited advice from middle-aged men about the podcast. Like, you need to do this and do that. I'm just like, start your own. Let's do our thing.
Yeah. Talking about criticism, though, you've written a lot about populism, or at least you've touched on it a few times. So is populism a cause of criticism from the left wing and Conservatives together, do you think?
So do both sides criticise the concept of populism?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think left-wing politics has a kind of public-facing reason why they dislike populism, which is why they think, it's so simplistic and it's just reductionist, and you're taking these very complex issues and then you're making them very simple. But then it has this kind of almost hidden motivation, in my opinion, where they really don't want mass opinion to be expressed, because as much as they like to suggest that mass opinion is just the product of, Rupert Murdoch pulling the strings and suddenly everyone hates mass immigration, I think deep down they know that a lot of the causes they support are presently quite unpopular. And if people dwell on them too much, it's going to make them more unpopular. But then I think from the right as well, I mean, traditionally the right has been fairly elitist, and I'm not saying that in like a bad sense. It's been valuing the authority of governments, of expertise, of even further back, the kind of aristocratic class. And if you do have this tendency towards respecting authority in traditional institutions, then you're going to be a little bit skeptical when people are doing more populist politics, because in a way it's quite egalitarian. It's kind of as, well, we're all in this together. We've all got this popular cause together. Whereas a right-wing tendency might be more like we have different interests and different parts to play in a society. And yeah, I think also populist politics can be quite crass and abrasive. And, you know, Donald Trump talking about the appearance of his opponents and Nigel Farage cracking jokes. I mean, it's not kind of the refined Bill Buckley on firing line sophistication that a lot of conservatives like. But that can also be a very shallow critique, because it can just be kind of people who like to imagine themselves as philosophy professors and getting quite offended about the way real people talk.
Yeah, that's true. What inspired you to start a Substack as well, then? Because there's been a huge move towards this, Substacks. And wait, when did it start?
I think mine started in 2020. I think
Substack.
Substack maybe was 2019, 2018. I could be wildly wrong.
Okay.
What do you most like to write about on there?
I mean, the good thing about Substack is you can just write about anything.
Yeah.
Like
He
if
most
you're,
likes to write about wrestling.
that's true. I most like to write about professional wrestling. But if you're writing for a magazine like ours, you know, you have to pitch your idea to me or to my colleagues, and then we'll think about, you know, does this fit with our magazine's tone? Does this fit with what's in the news, what people are interested in? Whereas if you have your own Substack, you can just go crazy with it and write about whatever you like. And you don't have, you know, annoying editors like me fiddling with your prose and saying, did you really mean this? And wouldn't it be better to write it like this? You can just write it however you want.
Yeah.
But then you have to resist the temptation to just be self-indulgent and, you know, wank on about nothing in particular for thousands of words.
Yeah, but if people are paying you to do it,
That's true.
go for it. I just realised you're our second Critic editor that's been on as a guest.
Oh,
Maybe we've got to be like Pokemon, got to catch them all.
is that Joe?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, Joe Bartosh, the lovely Joe.
coming out soon. So, news of Priti Patel going to run for leadership for the Tory party broke this week. Do you think a more hardline Tory like her will be able to change much, or do you think now reform are increasingly getting established that the Conservative Party will be dead in the water?
I mean, I don't think Priti Patel is hardline Tory. I think she kind of embodies that conservative inclination towards talking tough and then acting soft. I mean, she was in government when they raised immigration to historically unprecedented levels, but then she might, you know, have a quote in the Telegraph saying something that's a bit chest beaty, and she looks very tough. So I think the extent to which hardline Tories can't achieve anything is because it's all a pose to begin with. Like there are institutional constraints on what the Conservatives can do, but a lot of their failure to achieve anything has been stemming from a lack of a desire to do anything.
Do you feel the same way about Suella Braverman?
I think Suella means what she says.
Yeah.
Whether she has the power as a politician and a personality to run an effective campaign that gains her enough support is a more vexed question.
How do you think the Conservative Party are going to form effective leadership now? Do you think it's going to take a long time?
I think it's going to take a long time. I think when Tony Blair was elected, the Conservatives had just years of squabbling amongst themselves.
Yeah.
And I don't see that changing because there's not really any dominant faction within the party. There's just these disparate little gangs of One Nation Tories and popular Conservatives and what are the ones? The traditional Conservatives. They're all so kind of diffuse and spread out. I don't think there's any kind of tendency that can come from within and really seize power within the party. So I think whoever they elect is going to end up being some kind of weak, fudged compromise. And then for the party to succeed, Keir Starmer would just have to really fail, which is very much a possibility.
Yeah. But do you believe by the time we come to the next election or, the next general election or something like that, that reform will have a lot of legs behind it at that point in time? Do you think it will only continue to grow for them?
I think it has a potential to go two very different directions. It has a potential to become a really serious political opposition. It has a potential to just fall apart in a comical way. Ultimately, Nigel Farage has many tremendous gifts, but bringing together a broad array of people and kind of redistributing power and it's not his main talent is being a personality and being the center of attention. So building a party, I'm not so sure. So they really need to bring the kind of the Dominic Cummingses of tomorrow through to establish a more effective institution, to establish a more coherent institution. We saw last week when Ben Habib was sacked in slightly confusing circumstances. So already there's a kind of disputes within the party, and they're going to need a lot of maturity and a lot of kind of setting personal beefs and personal ambitions to one side to become effective. But they've got a chance. So if they don't do anything, it's their own fault.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I think when I look at Nigel walking around Parliament now, I think you don't actually want to be there.
Oh yeah. He's already in America.
Yeah, you can't be asked for this, like, and then you've got the other team of Reform MPs who are, I mean, some are more sort of personality politics than others. So you've got kind of Richard Tice, who's kind of personality politics, Lee Anderson more so, but then I do wonder, for the Reform Party to grow and succeed in the way that it's kind of characterised as kind of this personality, this is us, we're so unique, we're personable, and you kind of understand who we are, and think of us as friends that you chat to down the pub kind of thing. It does rely on the fact you've got like clear personalities you can relate to. But I think Nigel, my theory is Nigel doesn't really like anyone else being the personality apart from him. So it's going to be impossible for them to grow up other personalities around him, because he's kind of the centre of attention. And I do worry about that.
Yeah, no, that's a huge problem. I think in the first Trump administration, we saw that when there is one dominant personality and they haven't really got the institutional structure beneath them, it can be difficult to achieve the goals of the party or the political movement. Now Reform, of course, doesn't have much power. But if it's going to have power in the future, it needs to establish not just its personalities, but the people behind the personalities, the people who are building these local networks of activists, the people who are entering institutions, and the people who are just keeping the peace between different conflicting personalities. I mean, I don't think there's necessarily a problem with having one major leading personality. But they need to have the support beneath them, and it can't. The appeal has to be trickling down rather than just staying at the top.
So that sounds like, to me, it sounds like Nigel spending too much time and taking too many pointers from the way he's watching Trump run his campaign is actually going to be subsequently negative for Nigel, because that's not the way things work. So yeah. So I'm just interested on the way you think about far right and far left. Do you believe that we need to seriously reevaluate what we've categorised as far right and far left? I know we touched on it earlier.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, now for many commentators, they'll kind of vaguely call centrists. If you say, maybe university students coming to Britain shouldn't be allowed to bring their family members, that's interpreted as some kind of scary, nationalistic, isn't that what Vladimir Putin would do sentiment? Whereas the rule that you're allowed to bring dependents is incredibly new. And I think we are at the point where anyone who doesn't agree with politics since mainstream politics since 2015 is this kind of scary throwback to the 1500s. Like even a lot of the rhetoric Tony Blair would issue about refugees. Now, if Nigel Farage was saying it, the papers would be calling for him to be beheaded. So it's a very strange mainstream conception of far right. And we do have to challenge it and not be afraid of the label, really. Yeah. Not because there aren't elements of the right that are unsavory. Of course there are. But because if you're accepting your opponent's framing of what's bad and unspeakable, then you're letting them establish the rules of the game. And then far left is an interesting one. Traditionally, you'd have to be a kind of communist, and now it's more connected with kind of wokeism. I know, I don't really... I'm against the whole left. Maybe some of it more than the rest of it, but I'll let them deal with the different degrees of left-wingery, because I'm just thinking about how to generally defeat them politically, and rather than saying, who's necessarily better than who.
If so, out of the Labour government, who would you like to see in power? Out of everyone in the Labour Party, who would you like to see?
I mean, I think it's a bit like asking me which part of my body would I like to be kicked in.
Yeah,
I don't want any of them are in power.
If you had to.
I mean, if Frank Field rose out of his grave, and the ghost of Frank Field, that's such a difficult question. I just don't like any of them.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to have to say Richard Bergen, because it would just be so funny. The sheer comedy value of Richard Bergen running a government. Even if Britain completely collapsed, just for humour, it would be wonderful.
So are there any current cultural trends or movements that you find particularly interesting or concerning, and why?
Goodness me, there's so many. When you're a writer, you spend all day thinking about hundreds of different cultural trends. How do I pin it down? I think one of the things that concerns me is the way that therapeutic language and thinking has come to dominate our whole sense of well-being, of how everything is about, mental health, and our whole language of relationships is filtered through this language of kind of red flags and problematic things. And the way we talk about politics is so focused on this kind of therapeutic, we need to, stop the division. And all of this language is kind of, it feels like it's come out of a 1950s New York therapy room. So rather than talking about happiness, we talk about mental health. Rather than talk about pain, we talk about trauma. And this very clinical, kind of soulless way that a lot of us, or at least a lot of culture, has reinterpreted human interaction is a trend that really concerns me. And I think we on the right need to rediscover a lot of the humour and the kind of vitality that can break through this very sterile discourse. Because as much as the left kind of emerged from this joyous hippies of the 60s, in many ways, it's become more like your kind of HR representative in a corporation. And we need to be almost more fun than we are.
Yeah. So how do you feel about the whole bring your whole self to work kind of thing? Because that kind of goes into that kind of hippie HR talk, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And which is completely dishonest, because, I mean, if somebody walks in and
in their pajamas, I always think.
Well, if somebody walked in their PJs, or if someone cracked a joke that was considered a bit outre, or if someone was bringing their whole lazy self to work and they were like, well, I'm not going to work anymore.
I brought my whole self. You told me to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the
extent to which cliches dominate British cultural life is amazing. I mean, I landed yesterday at Luton, and there was this big sign at the train station that was like, "Remember, someone cares about you, Gary." And I was like, "Who is Gary? Why does he care about me?" But it's like it doesn't do anything for someone. Like, potentially someone's looking at that and they really have no one in their life. There really is no one that cares about them. And because an advertising board is telling them that they're loved, I mean, that's just going to make things worse. So.
I think so too. Yeah. What do you think it is to really be kind then?
So to be kind is to actually act rather than just speak. Like, if I'm walking past a homeless person and I'm, just looking down, I'm like, I'm so sorry for you. This is terrible. I feel so bad for you. Bye. It's really accomplished nothing. And the same is true in a more subtle way in our kind of day-to-day social life and in our institutions. All of our institutions are telling us to be healthy and to be happy and to be safe without actually really doing anything. I think I'm right in saying that during lockdowns, when all of these students were, padlocked away in their accommodation, probably going mad with boredom and frustration and thinking about the debts that they were racking up while being taught through Skype by a bored lecturer, they were all like, oh, how can we improve mental health services? And it's like, well, mental health services can be good, but why are you making people's lives so miserable in the first place to make them need mental health services? So it's about not just saying the kind words, but acting with a kindness that measurably improves people's lives and doesn't just sympathise in with their resolvable pain.
Well, yeah, you hear it all the time. If for any problem, go and get therapy, go and get therapy. From the government, go and get therapy. But then if anyone turns up to go and get therapy, there are no therapy services or counselling services available. So it's just, really? So you like writing about wrestling, and you're a big fan of wrestling and the mayhem of that, I guess. But are you enjoying the mayhem of the government change?
There's not enough violence. I mean, if Keir Starmer was running into Parliament and just smashing Rishi Sunak with a chair, it would be much more fun. No, obviously that would be terrible. But I mean, there's a lot of comparisons you can draw between pro wrestling and politics without wanting to sound like a terrible nerd. Because in wrestling, there's the layers of fantasy and reality. So of course it's presented on the surface as something that's real, and these people are really competing and they really hate each other.
That's so true.
And then behind it, there's this layer of artificiality. And the same can be true in a more nuanced way in politics. If you're ever watching Prime Minister's Questions, it is like pro wrestling for nerds, or maybe I should say nerdier people. There's just a lot of performative antics. There's a lot of people pretending they hold particular positions when they don't. I mean, Conservatives talking very tough and then acting like saps. There's a great example. They have this kind of chest beating, we're going to cut immigration, and then we're going to do this, we're going to smash the woke. And then they give millions of pounds to far left charities and raise immigration to unprecedented levels. That's a very kind of pro wrestling-y way to act. So there's a lot of comparisons you can draw.
How do you handle feedback from readers, especially when it comes to controversial topics?
So yeah, like I said before, trying to separate what I think is just abuse from what is actually communicating like a meaningful and serious problem is very important. I think when it's attacking you as a person, you can either laugh about it or you can cry about it, and it's better to just laugh about it and not take it too seriously. If I'm going to look in the comments of this podcast and see people saying, who's this effing idiot and what is he talking about? I can either let it ruin my day or just laugh and move on. And you've got to try and do the latter, because there's always going to be people who dislike you, whatever you're doing in life. And sometimes they dislike you for good reasons, and that's something you should focus on. But sometimes they just dislike you because you're not their kind of person, or because they're a little bit miserable. And you can't let it get to you.
But you're happy where you are, with where your career's going and everything. So.
No, I don't think you should ever be happy with where your career's going. I think that would be a recipe for complacence. I'm very
happy where you are
unhappy.
Then.
Happy with where I am, and yeah.
That's good. Anyway, so just come to the end now. So if you would like to find Ben, where can you find Ben?
So you can find me writing for the Critic magazine. That's thecritic.co.uk, or my Substack, which is bensixsmith.substack.com, or at Twitter it's @BD6smith.
So thank you very much for coming on the show. Sorry we lost Fleur halfway through. I don't know what happened there, but thank you for listening. Goodbye.